The stagecoach groaned to a halt at the edge of Sorrow Creek, and Nora Whitfield felt the wheels settle into the dust like something giving up. She'd been riding for 9 days, 9 days of cracked leather seats and strangers who did not speak, 9 days of watching the country grow stranger and emptier through a window that would not fully close. Now the door swung open and the Wyoming light came pouring in, and she squinted against it, her hand rising on instinct to shield her eyes. The driver was an old man with a beard the color of bone meal. He had spoken perhaps 4 sentences to her in 9 days, and he did not speak now. He simply reached up and offered his hand. She took it. His fingers were cold, despite the September warmth, cold and dry like driftwood that had been in the river too long. She stepped down with her small leather trunk in one hand and her bouquet of dried wildflowers in the other. The flowers had been fresh when she left St. Louis. They were not fresh anymore. They were the color of old paper, and the petals fell when she moved, leaving a trail behind her like breadcrumbs in a story she half remembered. Then the old man did something strange. He reached into the deep pocket of his weathered duster coat and brought out two things. The first was a heavy iron key brown with rust, large enough that it filled the cup of his palm. The second was a letter folded twice and sealed with 3 wax seals, all of them black. Black wax was a thing she had only seen once before on a letter sent to her mother by a hospital in Chicago announcing a death. He pressed both into her hands without ceremony. "Miss," he said, and his voice was gravel pulled from a riverbed, "this key has been waiting on you a long time, longer than you know." She tried to ask him what he meant. The words formed on her tongue, but he was already climbing back up to his seat, already gathering the reins. His name was Silas Brand. She had learned that much from the way passengers in Cheyenne had spoken to him. Silas Brand, the old driver who took the high routes nobody else would run. Silas Brand, who looked like a man carrying a debt he had nearly paid off, but not quite. The horses turned. The coach rolled away. Within a minute, it was nothing but a smear of dust on the Aberdeen flats, headed back toward everything she had ever known. Nora stood alone with a key in one hand and a letter in the other, and a town behind her that did not seem to want her. Sorrow Creek did not look the way its name suggested. It did not look sad. It looked indifferent, which was worse. The barber pole had bled its colors out years ago. The general store had a window held together with rawhide strips. 3 horses were tied to the rail outside a building that might have been a saloon or a church depending on the hour. A few men sat on the porch in front of the saloon. They watched her without watching her. She had learned the difference in St. Louis. Some men looked at a woman the way a hawk looks at a field scanning for movement. These men looked the way old dogs look at strangers, tired, cataloging, waiting to see if there was going to be trouble before they bothered to stand up. An old woman emerged from the doorway of the dry goods store. She wore black from her collar to her shoes. She looked at Nora, and her eyes traveled slowly down the white wedding dress, dust-stained at the hem, the small bouquet of dead wildflowers, the heavy iron key in her hand. Then the old woman crossed herself. She actually made the sign of the cross 3 quick touches, and then she turned and went back inside, and the door closed behind her like a verdict. Nora swallowed. She had a strange dry feeling in her throat, the feeling of something already going wrong before it had begun. She thought about the train back to St. Louis. She thought about the boarding house above the bakery, the small room with its single window, and the smell of yeast that came up through the floorboards every morning at 4. She thought about the women at Mrs. Halloran's dress shop who had told her she was too soft to model the gowns, that customers did not want to see a plump girl in their wedding silks. She thought about the loan she had taken to bury her mother. She thought about Jasper Calloway and what his attention had cost her. There was nothing to go back to, so she walked. A boy at the livery, perhaps 11 years old with a milk tooth missing in front, agreed to rent her a mule for $2. When she said she was going to the Holloway place on Breckett Road, he stopped counting her coins and looked up at her. The Holloway brothers, he said. Yes. He looked at the iron key in her belt where she had tucked it. His eyes lingered there. You know them. I am married to one of them, Nora said. The boy blinked. He had the face of a child who had been told not to ask questions. He nodded slowly and finished counting her coins. As she mounted the mule, awkward in her dress, he held the bridle steady. Ma'am, he said, and his voice had dropped to nearly a whisper. You watch out for that key. She looked down at him. What do you mean? But the boy only shook his head and stepped back, and she understood that he had already told her more than he was supposed to. The Breckett Road was 2 ruts in the dry earth separated by a spine of yellowed grass. The mule walked steadily, head down ears, flicking at flies. The September sun was burning toward evening in that slow, reluctant way the high country had, as if the land itself resented the coming dark and held the heat as long as it could. A hawk circled something in the middle distance. The smell of sage came up from the bruised stems where the mule's hooves passed over them. Nora rode and remembered. She remembered being 23 years old and standing in a kitchen on Olive Street, holding her mother's hand while the older woman coughed blood into a rag. She remembered the doctor's bill afterward, the undertaker's bill, the cost of a small stone with a small name on it. She remembered Jasper Calloway, who had been kind for exactly long enough to make her trust him. He had loaned her money to bury her mother. Then he had loaned her more when the rent was late, when the cough she had inherited from her mother sent her to bed for 2 weeks. And then he had owned her in the way men of that kind owned women. Not in body, worse, in the daily fear of what might happen if she did not do what he said. She had cleaned a gambling house at night for nearly 2 years. She had carried buckets of vomit and broken glass out of back rooms where men lost everything. She had handed silver dollars across to Jasper at the end of every week, watching him count them with his slow, careful fingers. She had told no one, not the women at the boarding house, not the minister at the small Methodist chapel where she still went every Sunday and prayed for a way out, prayed for forgiveness, prayed for the strength to keep going one more week. The advertisement had appeared in the matrimonial news in March. Widower, 6 sons, Wyoming High Country, seeks woman of strong character, appearance not important, God-fearing preferred. She had read it 3 times. She had cut it out with a pair of borrowed scissors. She had folded it into her Bible at the page where Ruth tells Naomi, where you go, I will go. Your people shall be my people. She had written the letter that night, a polite letter, an honest letter mostly. She did not mention Jasper. She mentioned her sewing skill, her ability to manage a household on little her faith. 3 weeks later, a proxy marriage had been performed in a courthouse in St. Louis with 2 strangers as witnesses, and she had become Mrs. Holloway by signatures she had never seen. Now she rode a mule up a dirt road in Wyoming toward a man she had never met. The ranch announced itself first by smell, wood smoke, then something sharper underneath animal and iron, and turned earth. Then the house came up out of the scrub, low and long, built in stages, by someone who had started with ambition and finished with whatever was at hand. The original structure was good limestone square and solid. The additions spreading out from its sides were timber and adobe brick, each one a slightly different color, as if they had been added in different seasons and different moods. A boy sat on the porch rail. He did not sit so much as perch balanced with the careless ease of a crow. He was perhaps 12 lean, with his father's jaw, if she was guessing. He watched her come up the road with the flat evaluation of someone much older. "You're her," he said, when she reined the mule in at the porch. "I suppose I am. Pa ain't here. Won't be back till supper. Which one are you?" "Cade." "Cade." She set the small trunk down and rolled her shoulder once where the strap had been digging in. "Are your brothers around?" Around turned out to mean scattered like drop coins. Wesley, the oldest 17, was in the barn. He was a tall, dark-eyed boy with hands already the size of his father's. He looked up when she stepped into the doorway, and his eyes told her everything she needed to know about how this was going to go. He did not speak. He turned back to the horse he was brushing and brushed it harder. Crawford 15 gave her a nod from the water trough. The nod landed somewhere between courtesy and dismissal, and he was gone before she could put her name to her tongue. Porter 9 watched her from behind a fence post, like she was a species he had not yet classified. Reeves 7 was nowhere visible at all, and the youngest she found him in the kitchen. He was standing on a wooden stool. He could not have been more than 3 feet tall on the floor, and even on the stool his head barely cleared the rim of the cast iron pot. The pot was on the stove. The pot was boiling. The pot was about to boil over. His small fists held a wooden spoon in both hands, gripped the way a child holds something he has been told is important and dangerous and his alone to manage. His face was set in concentration so fierce it was almost painful to see. She crossed the room in 4 strides and pulled the pot to the side of the stove. The boy looked at her. He had brown eyes. He had a crust of something dried on his chin from earlier in the day's small disasters. He held the spoon like a weapon he was not sure how to use. "What is it?" she asked. She meant, "What are you making?" "Supper," he said. She looked into the pot. Cornmeal mush scorched along the bottom, lumpy through the middle, swimming in far too much water. She looked at the boy who was watching her look at it with an expression so carefully neutral that she recognized it at once. The face of someone braced for criticism. She had worn that face for years. She still wore it sometimes. "How old are you?" she asked. He held up 4 fingers. 4 years old, and you are making supper." She did not say it like a marvel. She said it like a fact she was filing away. A fact about this house. A fact about the man she had married by paper. A fact that hurt her in a place she had not realized was still tender. "What is your name?" The boy mumbled something that sounded like Rue. "Rue," she repeated. He nodded, satisfied. She took off her coat and hung it on the peg by the door. The iron key was in her coat pocket. She rolled up her sleeves. She looked around the kitchen. It was not a disaster in the dramatic sense. It was a disaster in the way of slow neglect, of meals managed rather than made, of a household running on momentum and very little else. The flour sack was nearly empty. There was cornmeal. There was salt pork wrapped in wax paper. There were dried beans soaking in a bowl since what looked like that morning. There were eggs in a basket, which was a mercy. There was lard and an onion with one soft spot she could cut around. A string of dried chilies hung by the window. There was a tin of coffee, cracked with grounds gone pale. She did not think about whether this was her place or not. She did not think about the man she had not yet met, or the sons watching her from various angles, or the proxy marriage paper folded in the lining of her trunk. She thought about the eggs and the beans and the salt pork. She thought about how many mouths there were and how much daylight was left. She made cornbread from scratch, pressed it into the skillet with a little lard until it set golden. She fried the salt pork thin and used the drippings to cook down the onion and the soaked beans together with one of the dried chilies crumbled in. She added a pinch of salt. She added a pinch more. The kitchen began to fill with something it had not known in a long time. Not just warmth, the particular smell of food made with intention. Rue did not get off his stool. He watched everything with the focused attention of a child absorbing information he meant to keep. The other boys came in without being called. She heard them before she saw them. Boots on the board floor, the shuffling scrape of chairs being pulled out. A low argument between Porter and Reeve over something that resolved itself before she turned around. They sat, all five of them. They did not speak. Cade had his arms crossed, which meant something, but she did not yet know what. She set the skillet of cornbread in the center of the table. She ladled beans into bowls. She put the salt pork on a chipped white plate. She filled the tin cup with water from the pitcher, going around the table the way she had done it 1,000 times in boarding houses and church socials and the long years of helping families that were not hers. Her hands knew this work. Her hands had always known this work. The door opened. He was taller than she had imagined from the letter, and she was not sure why she had imagined height at all. He stood in the doorway for a moment, taking in the room the way a man takes in a room he expects to be one way and finds different. Not alarmed, just recalibrating. He had a beard going gray at the edges and hands that matched hers in their record of work. A hat he took off when he crossed the threshold. A face that had been weathered past the point of easy reading. He looked at the table, he looked at her. Mr. Greer, she said, because that was the name she had practiced on the road. Then she caught herself. Mr. Holloway. Mrs. Whitfield, he said. Then he caught himself too, because she was Mrs. Holloway now technically, and the mistake seemed to cost him something visible. Nora, she said, sit down, supper is ready. Behind him another man stepped through the door. This one was slightly shorter, slightly leaner, with hair the color of dark honey and eyes the color of strong amber. He was younger by a year or two. He looked at Nora and, unlike his brother, he smiled. It was a small smile, careful, but it was a smile. He took off his hat and held it against his chest. Ma'am, he said, I am Ezra, Garrett's brother. Garrett. So that was his name. Garrett Holloway. She had said Mr. Greer to herself on the road because the proxy paperwork had used an old surname, a clerical error she had been told would be corrected. She had not even known her own husband's first name until this moment. Garrett sat at the head of the table. There was no chair there. He pulled a stool from against the wall, and she filed that away. The absent chair, another thing that had been managed around and not replaced. Ezra sat to his right. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Rue picked up his spoon. Just that. And it broke whatever had been holding the room still, and suddenly all of them were eating, and the only sounds were spoons against tin, and the pop of the stove, and the wind finding some gap in the timber of the newer addition and sighing through it. Nora ate standing at first by the stove. Then Cade, 12 years old, whose arms had been crossed, whose face had been set the whole time, pushed out the empty chair beside him with his boot. He did not look at her. He just pushed it out and looked at his bowl. She sat. Garrett Holloway watched his sons eat. She watched him watching them. And in that watching, she saw the whole shape of the last 2 years of his life. The management, the holding together, the decisions made late at night when there was no one to make them with, the sleep that had not been sleep, the coffee gone cold beside the chair where he had fallen asleep, waiting for one of the boys to stop coughing or stop crying or stop calling for his mother. Garrett picked up his spoon. He took a bite of the beans. He set the spoon down and was quiet for a long moment. "This is good," he said quietly, not to the room, almost to himself. "It's beans," Wesley said from the far end of the table, the first words the eldest had spoken since she had arrived. "It's the best beans," Garrett said, just as quiet, "I have had in a long time." Wesley looked at his bowl. He said nothing else. Ezra glanced at Nora across the table and gave her a small nod the way one soldier nods to another after a battle has gone better than expected. He was a man she could already see who knew how to hold the warmth in a room when his brother could not. After supper, the boys dispersed into the evening routine she did not yet know. Rue fell asleep on his stool before anyone noticed his small face pressed to the wood of the table. Garrett carried him out without ceremony, the boy limp and trusting in his father's arms, and she watched the door close behind them and felt something she could not name. She washed the dishes at the basin. The water was cold. Her hands had been cold for 9 days. They were cold now. When Garrett came back, she had set the coffee pot to boil from the last of the grounds in the cracked tin. She poured 2 cups. She handed him one. He took it without comment and stood by the window where the last bruise of light was going violet over the high pasture. "You did not have to cook," he said. "No," she agreed. "The boys can manage." Rue was on a stool trying to make mush. "He is 4. Something moved through Garrett's face quick as weather. Not shame. Closer to the look of a man who has been managing so long, he has stopped seeing what he was managing through. "I was not criticizing," Nora said. She meant it. "I was just cooking." He turned the cup in his hands. "My wife," he said. The word was difficult for him. "Mira, she passed 2 winters ago, lung fever. The boys were never the same after." Nora nodded. She had known he was a widower. The advertisement had said so, but she had not known her name. Mira. The name landed in her chest like a small stone dropped into still water, sending rings outward. "I did not know how to be a father to 6 without her," Garrett said. He said it to the window, not to her. "I still do not know." "Why did you place the advertisement?" she asked. He turned then and looked at her. Really looked. His eyes were the color of whiskey held to a candle. They were tired in a way that no sleep would fix. "That is the strange thing," he said slowly. "I never did." She felt the air change in the room. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I never placed any advertisement. I have not had the heart for that. Ezra and I have been holding this place together with prayers and baling wire. I would not have brought a stranger into this house, not yet. Maybe not ever." Nora set her cup down very carefully. Her hands had begun to shake. "Then who?" she said. Garrett shook his head. "I do not know. The first I heard of it was when a letter came 2 months ago saying that the proxy marriage had been performed in St. Louis. I thought it was a swindle. I rode into Cheyenne to see the lawyer. He had the papers. My name was on them, my signature, or what looked like my signature. But you did not sign." "I did not sign." She stared at him. The kitchen was very quiet. Outside, somewhere in the yard, one of the boys was crossing toward the barn with a lantern. Porter, she thought, by the size of the shadow. The lantern light lurched in the wind, small and warm and steady against all that dark. "Then who arranged this?" she said again. Garrett did not answer at first. He looked at the iron key in her coat where it hung on the peg by the door. The shape of it pressed visibly against the wool. "That key," he said. "What about it? Where did you get it?" "The driver, Silas Brand. He gave it to me when I stepped down off the coach. He said it had been waiting for me." Garrett made a sound that was not quite a laugh. There was no humor in it. There was something else. Recognition, maybe. The recognition of a man who has just realized he is part of a story that someone else has been writing. "Come with me," he said. He picked up a lamp and crossed the kitchen and went down the long hallway that ran the length of the original limestone part of the house. She followed. The boards creaked under their feet. The hallway smelled of old wood and dust and something faintly floral that she could not place. He stopped at the last door at the end, a door she had walked past on her way to the kitchen and had not registered. "This door has been locked for 2 years," he said, "since Mira passed. None of us has been inside it. We could not bring ourselves to. The key was lost, or so I thought." He turned to her. He held out his hand. She took the iron key from her coat pocket and gave it to him. He looked at it for a long moment. Then he tried it in the lock. It turned smoothly as if it had been waiting. The door swung inward. The room beyond was small and clean, except for a thick layer of dust on every surface, the dust of 2 years of being undisturbed. There was a bed with a quilt of blue and yellow stars, faded but lovingly made. There was a silver hand mirror on a small dresser, its silver tarnished black. There was a wooden chest at the foot of the bed, and on the bed itself, laid out as if for a wedding morning, was a yellowed white dress with delicate lace at the cuffs. Beside the dress sat a leather-bound journal, the cover worn smooth by hands that no longer held it. The name on the spine in faded gilt letters read Mira Holloway. And beside the journal lay an envelope. The envelope was sealed with red wax. The hand that had written the address had been careful, neat, the hand of a woman who had been a school teacher before she was a wife. The address read in small, clear letters, "For the woman who comes after me." Garrett stopped in the doorway. He did not step into the room. He stood looking at the envelope on the bed, and his face, which had been so carefully composed all evening, came undone in increments. The corners of his mouth, the line of his ear, the skin around his eyes. "She wrote that," he said. "It was not a question. She wrote that before she—" He could not finish. Nora stepped past him into the room. She felt the weight of 2 years of silence pressing against her shoulders. She walked to the bed. She picked up the envelope. The wax was hard under her thumb. She broke the seal. The paper inside was thin and slightly yellow. The handwriting was the same careful school teacher's hand. She read, "To the woman who comes after me," the letter began. "If you are reading this, then I am no longer in the world, and you have come to take the place I cannot fill. Do not let that frighten you. I do not want you to take my place. I want you to take your own place beside the man I loved and the children I bore. They are good souls, Garrett and the boys, and they need you in ways you cannot yet see. Garrett will not have asked you here. He is too proud to admit he needs anyone. So I have asked you here in his name through arrangements I made in my last weeks. The driver, Silas Brand, was my friend. I trusted him with the key to this room and with the instructions for what to do when enough time had passed, when my Garrett had grieved long enough to be ready and not so long that he had gone hard. 2 years was the number I gave. 2 years from the date on my stone. Forgive me for the deception. I did not know how else to give him a chance at life again. Nora sat down on the edge of the bed. Her knees would not hold her. She read on. I do not know who you are. I have prayed for you every night since I knew I would not see another spring. I have prayed that you would be strong because Garrett needs strength, that you would be patient because the boys need patience, that you would have a forgiving heart because every one of us in this house will hurt you at some point, not from malice but from grief that does not know where else to go. Be gentle with my Cade. He carries more than a child should. Be kind to my Wesley. He is angry because he thinks anger is what a man does when he is afraid. Watch over Rue. He was barely walking when I went to bed for the last time. He will not remember me, and that is a mercy, but it is also a kind of theft. Love them for me since I cannot. Love them as your own when you are ready. The letter went on. Nora read it twice, then a third time more slowly, her finger moving under each word. When she finally lowered the page, Garrett was still standing in the doorway. He had not come into the room. He could not. What does it say? He asked. His voice was hoarse. She did not give him the letter. Not yet. That letter was hers. Mira had written it to her woman to woman across the boundary of death, and it was hers to hold first. It says, Nora said softly, that she loved you very much and that she did not want you to be alone. Garrett made a small sound like a man taking a step on a leg he did not know was broken. She arranged this, he said. Yes. She wrote the advertisement. Yes. Through the driver. Through the driver. He leaned against the door frame. He pressed the heel of his hand against his eyes. His shoulders shook once, twice, and then steadied. He did not weep. Or if he did it the way a stone weeps, slow and inward, and where no one could see. I should have known, he whispered. She always knew best, even at the end. Nora looked down at the iron key in her hand. She had carried it across 9 days and 1,000 miles without knowing what it opened. Now she knew. It opened a room and a marriage and a life that had been left on a table for her by a woman she would never meet, a woman who had thought of her in the last weeks of a dying body and had built a small, careful bridge from there to here, from the past to the present, from one wife to another. I will not stay in this room tonight, she said. It is hers, not mine, not yet. There is another room, Garrett said. Down the hall, I will show you. But neither of them moved for a long time. Outside, the wind found the gap in the timber of the newer addition and sighed through it. Porter's lantern had reached the barn. Its small flame burned warm and steady against all that dark. Nora thought of Ruth's face over the cornmeal pot, of Cade's boot pushing out the empty chair, of Wesley saying it is beans and Garrett answering the best beans I have had in a long time, and the whole distance contained between those two sentences. The distance between a son afraid to need anything and a father who had forgotten he was allowed to. She thought, I am not here to rescue anyone. She thought, but I am here. The wind moved through the house. Sorrow Creek settled into its night. Somewhere down the hall, a door closed softly. Somewhere in the dark, a child murmured in his sleep and was answered by no one and slept on. And Nora Whitfield, who was now Nora Holloway by the will of a dead woman who had thought of everything, sat on the edge of a stranger's bed with a letter in her hand and felt the iron weight of a key she would carry in some form for the rest of her life. She did not yet know about Jasper Calloway. She did not yet know that he had read of her marriage in a notice forwarded by a friend in St. Louis, that he had calculated her debt with interest, that he was already buying a train ticket west. She did not yet know that Ezra Holloway, the brother with the honey-colored hair and the careful smile, had already begun to look at her in a way that would in time become a problem he would solve only by leaving. She did not yet know that this winter would be the worst in 12 years, or that Rue's cough would come back, or that she would sit by his bed for a night and a day, and another night while the snow came down outside in sheets. She knew only that she was here, that a fire was burning in a stove she had cleaned, that a child she had fed was sleeping somewhere in the house, that a man she had not chosen but who had not chosen her either was standing in a doorway he had not been able to cross for 2 years, undone by the words of a wife who had loved him enough to let him go on living without her. She folded the letter. She placed it back in its envelope. She stood. She crossed to the doorway and gently put her hand on Garrett Holloway's arm the first time she had touched him. "Show me my room," she said. He nodded. He led her down the hall. The lamp swung in his hand and threw long shadows on the limestone walls. At the second-to-last door, he stopped and opened it. Inside was a small, clean room with a narrow bed and a chair and a window that looked east toward the morning. "This is yours," he said. "Thank you." He stood in the hall a moment longer. He looked as if he wanted to say something more. He could not find it. "Good night, Mrs. Holloway," he finally said. "Good night, Mr. Holloway." He went down the hall. She watched the lamp light recede until it turned a corner and was gone. She stepped into her room. She closed the door. She sat on the edge of the narrow bed in her dust-stained wedding dress, with her dead bouquet on the small dresser, and the letter from Mira in her lap, and the long silence of a Wyoming night around her like a coat. She did not cry. She had not cried in 9 days. She had not cried since the train had pulled away from the St. Louis platform, and she had watched the city of her old life slide backward into history. She did not cry now. She bowed her head instead the way her mother had taught her to bow it, and she said a small, simple prayer, the prayer of a woman who has finally arrived somewhere after a very long journey. "Lord," she said silently, "I do not know what this is yet, but I am here. Help me to be useful. Help me to be kind. Help me not to disgrace the woman who built this bridge for me. Amen." Then she lay down on the narrow bed in her dusty white dress, and she did not sleep, but she rested. And the wind pushed at the timber of the new addition, and the stars came out one by one over Sorrow Creek. And Porter's lantern, still burning at the barn door, made a small, warm point of light in the great dark country, like a candle set in a window for someone who has not yet come home. The first morning broke gray and slow over the Holloway Ranch, and Nora was already awake when the light came. She had not slept. Sleep was a luxury for women who knew where they were, and she did not yet know where she was. She had only known, through the long, wind-shifted hours of the night, that a stove in the kitchen needed feeding before the boys came down, and that a child somewhere down the hall was 4 years old and had been making his own supper on a stool. She rose. She dressed in a plain gray work dress she had pulled from her trunk. She braided her honey-colored hair into a single thick rope down her back. She washed her face from the basin of cold water on the dresser. She looked at herself in the small spotted mirror, and she did not see a bride. She saw a woman with full cheeks and tired blue eyes and a small scar on her chin from a sewing needle slipped years ago. She saw a woman who had arrived. That was enough. She went to the kitchen. She built up the fire in the iron stove the way her mother had taught her, the way every woman in every house she had ever cleaned had taught her. She put water on for coffee. She mixed flour and lard and salt and water for biscuits, working the dough with the heel of her hand. She found a tin of bacon in the cold pantry and laid strips of it in the heavy skillet. By the time the first set of boots hit the floor upstairs, the kitchen smelled of bacon and wood smoke and the slow promise of bread. Crawford, 15, came down first. He stopped in the kitchen doorway and looked at her, and his eyes went to the table set with tin plates and tin cups in their proper places. He did not say good morning. He did not have to. He sat down. He folded his hands on the table the way a boy folds his hands when he has been raised by a mother who was particular about manners and is no longer there to correct him. Porter came next, then Reeve, then Cade, who took his place beside the now reliably present chair Nora had occupied at supper. Wesley came last. He paused at the threshold. He looked at the food on the stove, and the woman at the stove, and the chair at the head of the table where his father would sit, and his jaw worked, and Nora knew he was deciding whether to eat. To eat would be a small surrender. To not eat would be a different kind of admission, a scene, a tantrum at 17 years old in front of his brothers. She did not turn around. She did not pressure him. She let him choose. He sat. He sat at the far end of the table. He did not look at her, but he sat. Garrett came in last from the yard, his coat dusted with the cold of the early dawn. He removed his hat. He took his place at the head of the table. He looked at the biscuits. He looked at the bacon. He looked at the cup of coffee Nora had already poured for him without asking, the way one pours for a man whose habits one has decided to learn. He said grace. It was the simplest grace she had ever heard. It was 4 sentences. It thanked God for the food. It thanked God for the hands that had made it. It asked for protection over the family. It said amen. It was the first time he had said grace at his own table since Mira had died. Crawford and Porter and Cade exchanged a look. Wesley stared into his plate. Rue, sitting in his stool, drawn close to his father, said amen in a clear, high voice, as if he had been waiting for the chance. The boys ate. They ate the way boys raised on managed meals eat when something is finally made. They cleaned their plates. They asked hesitantly, almost shyly, for seconds. Nora gave them seconds. She gave them thirds where she had it. Wesley took a second biscuit from the plate without speaking, and Crawford glanced sideways at him as if he had witnessed something significant. When the meal was over, Garrett pushed his chair back. He looked across the table at Nora. "Mrs. Holloway," he said. The name was still strange in his mouth. "That was a fine breakfast, thank you." It was not much what he said, but it was the first time he had thanked her aloud, and the first time he had used her name, and Wesley heard it, and Cade heard it, and Rue heard it. Words like that in a house that had forgotten them were a small landslide. The boys filed out into the morning. Garrett rose and put on his hat. He paused in the doorway. "Ezra is fixing the south fence today," he said. "I will be at the calving shed with Wesley. If you need anything from town, write it down. I will send Crawford." "I will," she said. He nodded once. He went out. The kitchen door swung closed behind him. She stood for a moment in the warm room. She looked at the table. The boys had stacked their plates. Wesley had stacked his at the bottom of the pile. It was the smallest gesture, almost not a gesture at all, but she knew what it was. It was a boy too proud to apologize, leaving an apology in the shape of a stacked plate. She gathered the dishes and went to the basin and began to wash, and she thought, this is how it begins. Not with declarations, not with grand reconciliations, with biscuits and bacon and a boy who stacks his plate. The first 3 weeks went like that. Each child came to her at his own pace in his own way, the way wild things will come to a fed hand if the hand stays still and patient long enough. Rue was the easiest. He had decided in a small 4-year-old way on the very first night that she was his now, and he followed her from room to room, holding the hem of her apron, watching her cook and sweep and mend with the same focused attention he had given the cornmeal pot. He did not call her mama yet. He called her Miss, as in, Miss, where is the spoon? Miss, can I have a piece of crust? Miss, will you tie my boot? The word miss in his mouth was not distance. It was reverence. He was a child who had been raised on respect for women, and he was offering her what he had been taught was the highest form of address. Reeve 7 was more careful. She found him on the loft of the barn one cold afternoon, drawing on the back of an old feed sack with a stub of charcoal from the fire. He had drawn a woman in a long dress with long hair standing under a tree. Nora climbed up the loft ladder slowly, her hand pressed to her side where the ladder rungs were narrow for her wider hips, and she settled herself beside him on the hay. "Who is she?" Nora asked. "Mama," Reeve said without looking up. Nora nodded. She did not speak for a long time. She let him keep drawing. The charcoal scratched. The barn smelled of hay and horses and old leather. "She was beautiful," Nora said finally. "She had yellow hair like you, but longer." Pa said her eyes were brown like mine, like Cade's. "Then she gave you both a piece of herself to keep." Reeve looked up at that. He looked at Nora the way a child looks when an adult has said something exactly right. Then he went back to his drawing. He drew a smaller figure beside the woman under the tree, a figure with a braid and a wider skirt and round cheeks. "That is you," he said. She had to look away for a moment. Porter 9 came to her through bread. He had been watching her bake for days, hovering at the edge of the kitchen like a stray cat near a back door. On the morning she made cinnamon biscuits from the last of a tin of sugar she had brought from St. Louis, he asked casually, as if the question had just occurred to him, whether biscuits were difficult. She said no. She said biscuits were just patience and a light hand. She offered to teach him. He pretended to consider it. He was a boy who had to pretend not to want things because wanting was dangerous in a household where wanting had not been answered for a long time. But within 3 days, he was at her elbow every morning, his small hands dusted white with flour, his face fierce with concentration as he learned to fold the dough. The first time he laughed in front of her was over a biscuit that had risen sideways. He laughed once sharply, and then he clapped his hand over his mouth as if he had committed a crime. She laughed too gently, and after a moment he let his hand fall and laughed again, and that was Porter handed over to her keeping. Cade 12 was harder. He tested her. He came to her one evening when she was mending a tear in Wesley's coat by the lamp, and he stood across the kitchen from her with his arms crossed. "Do you know how my mama died?" he said. It was a challenge, and she heard it as one. She set the mending down. She did not look up at first. She let the question sit in the air. Then she lifted her eyes. "No," she said. "Your father told me only that she was sick. He told me it was lung fever." "She coughed up blood for 3 months," Cade said. His voice was flat. He was reciting something he had been carrying for 2 years. "Every night I could hear her. I slept on the other side of the wall from her, and I could hear her cough. And I could hear Pa say it is all right, and it was not all right. Then one night she stopped, and in the morning Pa came out of the room and said she was gone." Nora nodded slowly. "And you were 10. I was 10. And you have been 10 ever since, Nora said. Some part of you, the part that listened through the wall. Cade's eyes filled. He blinked hard. He did not cry. He was too proud to cry in front of her yet. But the tears stood in his eyes, and he did not wipe them, and he did not look away. I am sorry, Nora said. I am sorry you heard that. I am sorry no one was there to hold your hand while you listened. She did not move toward him. She knew better. He came to her on his own. He crossed the kitchen, slowly, his arms still crossed, and when he reached her chair, he stood beside her, not quite touching. She lifted her arm. She did not pull him in. She just lifted it and made the space available. After a moment, he leaned against her shoulder. He stood there leaning stiffly for perhaps 2 minutes. He did not weep. He did not speak. Then he straightened and he walked out of the kitchen without a word. The next morning, he passed her the salt at breakfast before she had asked. That was Cade. Crawford, 15, came to her through silence. He helped her with the heavier work without being asked. He carried water from the pump. He chopped kindling and stacked it by the stove. He did not speak to her much, but he stopped not speaking, which was a different thing entirely. One afternoon when she slipped on a wet step at the back porch, he caught her arm and steadied her, and he turned the color of fresh brick across his cheeks, and he said, careful with, "You, Mrs. Holloway," and then fled. She watched him go and smiled to herself and thought 15 is a hard age and that boy is going to be all right. Wesley remained the closed door. Wesley ate at her table. He did the work his father gave him. He did not insult her. He did not address her directly when he could avoid it. He treated her like a piece of furniture that had been moved into the house without his consent. She let him. She did not push. She had been pushed in her life, and she knew what it cost. She kept his coat mended. She made his portions full. She left him alone. Garrett she came to through the small evenings. After supper, when the younger boys had gone to bed, and Crawford had taken the lantern out for the last barn check, she would pour 2 cups of coffee from whatever was left in the pot. She would set one on the kitchen table. She would sit down with her mending and not look up. After a few days, Garrett began to come in and sit across from her and pick up the cup. They did not speak much at first. He was not a man given to easy conversation. She was not a woman who insisted on it. They sat. The fire popped. The wind pressed against the window. He watched her hands work the needle. She watched the steam rise from his cup. One evening, 2 weeks in, he set the cup down and said, Myra used to mend by this lamp. It was the first time he had said her name to Nora since the night with the letter. Nora kept her eyes on her work. She must have had steady hands. The seams in this coat are very fine. She made the coat. Wesley has worn it since he was 11. She made it big so he would grow into it. She loved him very much. She loved all of them very much. Nora set the mending down. She looked across the table at him. He was looking at his coffee. He was not looking at her. But he was talking, and she understood that she was being trusted with something. Tell me about her, she said, if you can. Not for me, for the boys. Someday they will want me to know things, and I will not have the answers, and I would like to have them. Garrett was quiet for a long time. Then he began to speak slowly the way a man speaks who has not used certain words in a long time. He told her about Mira as a young school teacher in Cheyenne, how she had come west on her own at 22, how she had refused him 3 times before she agreed to marry him because she had wanted to be sure. He told her about the first child Wesley born in a snowstorm with no doctor for 40 miles. He told her about the way Mira had laughed in the years before the sickness took her full and unembarrassed, the way she had sung at her work in those good years, the way she had taught each of the boys to read at the kitchen table by the time they were 5. Then his voice dropped lower and he told her about the long last year of Mira's life, how she had come in from the wash one autumn afternoon and sat down on the kitchen step and could not get up for an hour, how a deep tiredness had settled on her that no rest could lift, how for 6 months he had told himself she was only run down from too many children, too close together, and a hard winter just passed. How by the spring she could no longer rise from the bed for more than an hour to stretch. How in the last 3 months the cough had come, and the blood with it, and the lamps had burned all night for 3 months, because she could not sleep lying down. She had made me promise, he said quietly, in the last week that I would not turn into a stone after she went. I broke that promise within a month. I have been a stone for 2 years, Nora. I did not know how to be anything else. He told her how Mira had been the one to say at the very end that he should not be alone, how she had taken his hand and pressed it to her cheek and made him promise he would let his life keep moving when she was no longer in it. She would have liked you, he said quietly. She did like me, Nora said. She wrote me a letter. He looked up at that. She had not given him Mira's letter to her. She still had not. But she rose now and went to her room and brought it back, and she set it on the table between them. It is yours to read, she said, if you want. He read it. His hands shook slightly as he held the page. He read it once. He read it twice. He folded it carefully and set it down. She thought of everything, he said. There was something almost like a laugh in his voice, the sound a man makes when he is too tired to weep at a small miracle. She always thought of everything. Yes, she did. He looked across the table at her. The whiskey in his eyes was warmer than she had yet seen it. Thank you, Nora. It was the first time he had used her given name. She did not trust her voice to answer. She nodded. The next Sunday she put on her best dress, the dark blue wool with the small white collar, and she rode with the family to the church in Sorrow Creek. The church was a small white building with a bell that did not work and a stove that smoked in the back. Garrett walked beside her up the front steps. The boys went ahead polished and combed with Cade, keeping a careful eye on Rue. Ezra walked behind them, a kind shadow. The whole town watched them come. Nora kept her chin lifted. She had been stared at her whole life. She did not flinch under it now. After the service, an older woman in black taffeta intercepted her on the church steps. She was small and sharp-eyed, and she had the bearing of someone accustomed to being heard. Mrs. Holloway, she said, and the name was sharpened to a point in her mouth. I am Beulah Patterson. Mira was my dearest friend in this world. Mrs. Patterson, Nora said, and inclined her head respectfully. I have heard her speak well of you in a letter she left me. That stopped the older woman in her tracks. Mrs. Patterson blinked. A letter she left you. Yes, ma'am. She wrote it before she passed. It came into my hands the night I arrived. Beulah Patterson stared at her for a long moment. Whatever speech she had been preparing, whatever cold welcome fell apart in her face. Her chin trembled. She mastered it. Mira always was the most thoughtful of women, she said very quietly. She was. I am sorry I never knew her. I would have liked to. You will need help, Mrs. Holloway, with 6 boys, with that house. If you find yourself wanting a friend, the door of my parlor is open to you. Thank you. I will remember that. Mrs. Patterson nodded. She walked away. Garrett, standing at Nora's elbow, let out a slow breath he had been holding. I have never seen Beulah Patterson back down from a position in 20 years, he said. She did not back down. She just found out the position was different than she thought. He looked at her with something that was almost a smile. It was not quite a smile, but it was close. The letter from Jasper Calloway arrived on a Tuesday in the middle of October. The mail rider brought it from Sorrow Creek with the rest of the week's mail, which Garrett dropped on the kitchen table without looking through. Nora was rolling out pie crust. She wiped her hands on her apron and sorted through the small pile. There were two flyers. There was a letter for Garrett from a cattle buyer in Cheyenne, and there was an envelope addressed to Mrs. Nora Whitfield, Sorrow Creek, Wyoming, in a slanted hand she would have known anywhere. She felt the floor tilt under her. She made herself finish the pie crust. She set the pie in the oven. She told Rue, who was watching from his stool, that she was going to the bedroom for a moment to lie down because her head was tired. He nodded gravely. She walked down the hall to the small east-facing room that was hers, and she closed the door, and she sat on the bed and opened the letter. Jasper Calloway's handwriting was elegant. He had the penmanship of a clerk, which is what he had been before he became something worse. Dearest Nora, the letter began. She had to stop and breathe through the dearest. The intimacy of it was a hand at her throat. I read with great surprise of your union with a Mr. Holloway of Wyoming. The notice was forwarded to me by a friend in St. Louis who knows of my interest in your welfare. Allow me to offer my belated congratulations on your marriage. I am sure it will bring you the comfort and stability you have so long deserved. I write, however, on a matter that I am confident you will wish to address in private. By my accounts, you departed our financial arrangement with a balance of $247 thus outstanding, plus the interest that has accrued in the months since. The total now stands at a little over $300. I am sure you have not forgotten this debt, but the press of new circumstances may have caused you to set the matter aside. I will be passing through Cheyenne and the surrounding country in the coming weeks on business. I had thought I might call upon you at your new home that we might settle the matter discreetly as old friends. I am sure your husband, a man of standing in his community, would prefer the matter not become widely known. I imagine he is also, like all husbands, curious about the years before his marriage, the little details, the work histories, the places one frequented after dark. Your loving servant, Jasper Calloway. Nora read it through twice. Then she stood up and went to the window and pressed her forehead against the cold glass, and her hands gripped the sill so hard her knuckles went white. She thought very clearly, I will burn it. I will burn it and tell no one. I will find the $300 somehow. I will sow nights. I will sell my mother's Bible. I will not let this man back into my life. She thought I will burn it. She did not burn it. She walked to the kitchen with the letter in her hand. The pie was just beginning to brown. Rue was still on his stool. Garrett was nowhere in sight. She set the letter on the table. She lifted the pie out of the oven. She set it on the windowsill to cool. Then she went out to the yard and walked down the slope to the south fence where Garrett was working alone repairing a stretch. The wind had pulled loose. She walked all the way down to him. He saw her coming and straightened up. The look on her face must have told him. He set the hammer down. Nora, he said. She handed him the letter without speaking. He read it. The skin around his eyes tightened. He read it again. He folded it slowly and held it in his hand. Who is he? Garrett said. She told him. She told him, standing in the wind on a fence line with a hammer at her husband's feet and a hawk circling overhead. She told him about her mother's death and the doctor's bills and the loan. She told him about the gambling house. She told him she had never sold herself in body, which she felt she needed to say even though Garrett had not asked, but that she had sold herself in another way, in the daily fear of a man who had owned her debt and used it. She told him she had cleaned vomit and broken glass for 2 years. She told him she had handed silver dollars across to Jasper Calloway every Friday night, while a piece of her soul went out with each one. She told him she should have told him before the marriage, that she had been a coward, that if he wished to send her back, she would understand and she would go. She did not cry while she told him. She had cried herself empty over Jasper Calloway long ago. When she finished, Garrett did not speak for what felt like a long time. He looked at the letter in his hand. He looked at the ground. He looked at her. Then he turned and walked away. He walked the length of the fence 50 yards and back. She stood where she was. She thought, this is the moment. This is the moment a man decides what kind of man he is. She prepared herself the way a woman prepares for any blow she has been expecting. He came back. He stopped in front of her. "Come up to the house," he said. "It is cold out here." He took her arm. He walked her up the slope. They went into the kitchen. He put her in the chair by the stove. He poured her a cup of coffee. He went to the shelf above the door where the family Bible sat large and black and worn. He brought it down. He set it on the table. He turned to a page he knew by heart. John chapter 8, he said, "The woman taken in adultery, they brought her to him to be stoned. He stooped down and wrote in the dust. He stood up and said, 'He that is without sin among you, let him cast the first stone at her.' And one by one they went away, beginning at the eldest, and only she remained. And he said, 'Woman, where are those thine accusers? Hath no man condemned thee?' She said, 'No man, Lord.' And Jesus said unto her, 'Neither do I condemn thee. Go and sin no more.'" He closed the Bible. He looked at her. "I am not without sin, Nora. I am not the man to throw the stone. And you have already sinned no more. The gambling house is 1,000 miles behind you. You came up that road to my door with nothing but a key and a letter and a wedding bouquet that was already dead. You have fed my children. You have mended my coat. You have made my house a house again. I am not sending you anywhere." She did not realize she was crying until she felt the tears on her hands. "He will come," she whispered. "He will come and he will tell. Let him come, Garrett. Let him come, Nora. We will meet him together." She wept then. She wept the way a woman weeps when she has been bracing for a blow for 9 days and 1,000 miles, and the blow does not come. Garrett did not move toward her. He gave her the room of her own weeping. After a while, he set his hand over hers on the table. He did not squeeze. He just rested it there warm and heavy and steady, and she pressed her wet palm up into his and held on. Jasper Calloway came 2 weeks later on a Saturday morning. He came riding up the Breckett Road on a pretty bay mare dressed in black broadcloth with a silver-mounted pistol on his belt and the easy slouch of a man who has never been told no by anyone who mattered. He came alone, or appeared to. 2 riders waited at the bend in the road a quarter-mile back. Nora saw them first from the kitchen window where she was rolling biscuits. She set the rolling pin down. She wiped her hands. She walked to the door. Garrett and Ezra were down at the calving shed. Wesley had ridden out with Crawford to the upper pasture before dawn. There were no men in the yard. There were only herself and the boys, with Cade splitting kindling at the woodpile, and Porter and Reeve playing some game with a stick and a ball on the porch, and Rue sleeping in the front room. She thought about running for Garrett. She thought about it for one full second. Then she stepped onto the porch and closed the kitchen door behind her. "Mr. Calloway," she said as he reined the mare in at the rail. He smiled. He had the smile of a man selling something. "Nora, my dear, you look well. The country agrees with you. You have, if I may say, filled out becomingly. You will not say. You will state your business and you will leave." The smile thinned. "I had hoped for hospitality, a cup of coffee, a private word." "There will be no private word. My husband knows everything. There is nothing left for you to threaten." The smile became something colder. He swung down off the mare. He took 2 steps toward the porch. "Then we will discuss the debt instead. $312.40, cash, today." "There is no cash for you here." "Then I think the conversation will need to be had with your husband after all. Where might I find him?" Behind her, the kitchen door opened. She did not turn. She knew the sound of those particular boots. She had been listening for them since she stepped onto the porch. But it was not Garrett. It was Wesley. Wesley, 17 years old, his father's son to the bone, with the long Sharps rifle from the rack above the door held in both hands at his hip. He had come back from the upper pasture early. She had not heard him come into the house. He must have come through the back. He must have been listening at the kitchen window. "You threatened my mother," Wesley said. His voice was not entirely steady. His jaw was set hard. The barrel of the rifle was not pointed at Jasper Calloway. It was pointed at the porch boards between them. But the meaning was clear enough. Nora could not breathe. He had said mother. Jasper Calloway looked at the boy. He looked at the rifle. He looked back at Nora. The 2 riders at the bend in the road had begun to drift forward, sensing trouble. But before they could close the distance, 2 more figures appeared. Garrett and Ezra walking up from the shed, their own rifles held casually but visibly. Garrett had the slow, steady walk of a man who had decided how the next minute was going to go. He stopped at the bottom of the porch steps. He looked up at Jasper Calloway. "You will not collect any debt from my wife today," Garrett said, "or any other day. You will leave Sorrow Creek. You will not write to her again. You will not speak her name in any company. If you do, I will hear of it, and I will come to find you, and you will not enjoy that visit. Do you understand me?" Jasper Calloway opened his mouth. "Do you understand me, sir?" There was something in Garrett's voice that made the bay mare shift uneasily. Jasper looked at the rifle in Wesley's hands. He looked at Garrett. He looked at Ezra, whose amber eyes were not warm at all in that moment. He looked at the 2 riders at the bend who had stopped advancing. He nodded once sharply. He climbed back onto the mare. He turned her. He rode away without another word, and his 2 men fell in behind him, and within 10 minutes there was nothing on the Breckett Road but a faint cloud of dust moving south. Nora's knees went out from under her. She sat down heavily on the porch step. Wesley lowered the rifle. He set it carefully against the porch rail. He stood looking at his boots. He did not look at her. He was 17, and he had just called her mother in front of God and his father and 3 strangers, and he did not know what to do with his self. She lifted her arms. "Wesley," she said softly. He came to her like a child, 17 years old, taller than she was by a head, and he came to her like a child. He sat down beside her on the porch step, and he put his face in his hands, and he wept. The slow, shamed weeping of a son who has not let himself weep for his real mother in 2 years, and has chosen this strange, unrelated moment to begin. She put her arm around his shoulders. She said nothing. She let him weep. Garrett stood at the foot of the steps and watched. He did not say a word. His own eyes were bright. He took off his hat. He held it against his chest. Kada had come up from the woodpile, his small axe still in his hand, and Porter had come around from the porch corner, and Reeve had come out of the house behind them, and Rue, woken by the voices, stood in the kitchen doorway in his nightshirt, rubbing his eyes. The whole family had assembled without anyone calling them. The whole family was watching Wesley weep into Nora's shoulder, and Nora hold him and Garrett stand bareheaded at the foot of the steps. After a long time, Wesley straightened. He wiped his face with the heel of his hand the way a man does when he refuses to use a handkerchief. He stood up. He picked up the rifle. He looked at Nora for the first time directly. "I should have been here sooner," he said. "You were here exactly when you needed to be," Nora said. He nodded. He went into the house with the rifle. The other boys went back to whatever they had been doing. Cade looked at Nora once and his eyes were wet, and he turned away. Garrett came up the steps and sat beside her where Wesley had been. "You all right?" he said. "I think so." "You called him Mother." "He called me Mother." "Yes." Garrett looked at his hands. He did. They sat in the late October sun on the porch step. The cottonwoods at the creek were turning gold. A line of geese moved across the southern sky in the moctoin-pulled shape of a bow. Garrett put his hat back on. "Nora." "Yes." "There is something I want to show you, something I have not been able to face for 2 years. I think I can face it now with you beside me." She looked at him. He stood up. He held out his hand. She took it. He led her into the house. He led her down the long hallway of the original limestone part. He stopped at the last door, the door that had been Mira's, the door she had unlocked once in the dark and never entered since. She had returned the key to him the morning after she arrived, and he had kept it. He took it from his pocket now. His hand was steady. He unlocked the door. He pushed it open. He stepped inside. This time he stepped inside. The room was dustier than she remembered. The light from the small east window fell across the bed, the silver hand mirror, the wooden chest, the yellowed wedding dress. It fell on Mira's leather-bound journal, still where Nora had left it. Garrett walked slowly to the bed. He sat down on the edge of it. He reached out and put his hand flat on the quilt of blue and yellow stars. He left it there. He closed his eyes. "I have not been in this room since the morning I closed the door," he said. "I could not. I told myself I would when I was ready, and I never was. Then you came, and I thought I would never need to. I would just leave it shut. Let it become a closet. Let the dust take it." And now, he opened his eyes. He looked at her standing in the doorway. "Now I think she would not want me to leave it shut. I think she would want this room to be a room again. I think she would want me to take her dress out of this room and put it in the wooden chest and let the air come in and let the boys come in if they want to remember. And I think she would want her journal." He picked up the journal. He held it for a moment. He held it out to her. "She wrote a letter to you," he said. "I read it after you gave it to me. There is a journal here she kept for years. I have not read a word of it, but I think she wrote some of it to whoever came after her. I think she meant for it to be read. I cannot read it yet, but when you are ready, you should." Nora took the journal. The leather was soft under her fingers. "There is something else," Garrett said. She looked up. "When I read her letter, there was a part that took me a few days to understand. About Ezra." Nora's hand tightened on the journal. "What did she write?" "She wrote, 'Watch over Ezra. He has a tender heart and he hides it. He will love you in time the way men with tender hearts love. Be gentle with him. Do not break what cannot be replaced. Do not take from Garrett the only brother he has." Nora swallowed. She had read those lines. She had read them and folded the letter and given it to Garrett a few days later only because she could not in good conscience keep the whole of it from him. She had braced for whatever this conversation would become. It was here now. She knew, Nora said quietly. She knew her brother-in-law, Garrett said. She knew what kind of man he was. I think she also knew what kind of woman she was sending us, and she knew the two would meet. He stood up from the bed. He came to the doorway. He did not touch her. He stood close. "Nora, I am not blind. I see how Ezra looks at you. I see how he is careful around you. I am not angry. I am not jealous. He has been my right hand for 2 years, and he has been a good uncle to my boys, and I owe him more than I can say. But I have to know." "Know what?" "Whether it is only him. Whether you—" She shook her head. She shook it before he had finished the sentence. "No," she said. "Garrett, no." He looked at her. He looked at her a long moment. "All right," he said. "That was all. That was the whole of it. All right." He did not press. He did not demand. He took her at her word the way a man does who has decided to trust the woman in front of him, even at his own risk. He turned to leave the room. He paused at the threshold. He looked back at her and at the bed where his first wife had died, and at the journal in her hands, and his eyes were very full, but they did not spill. "I am glad you are here, Nora," he said. He went down the hall. She stood in Mira's room with the journal pressed against her chest. The afternoon light was changing. Outside, somewhere in the yard, Wesley was chopping wood, and the strokes of the axe came steady, and even the rhythm of a boy working through something larger than the wood. She thought of all the things that had happened in the past 4 weeks. She thought of Rue on the stool. She thought of Wesley with the rifle. She thought of Jasper Calloway riding away and not looking back. She thought of Garrett opening this door finally after 2 years and trusting her to stand in the doorway while he did it. She thought of Ezra working silently somewhere on the place with a tenderness in him that had not yet been spoken aloud and might never be. She thought of Mira, who had thought of all of this, who had built the bridge and lit the lamp and walked away. She held the journal. She did not open it yet. She would open it, but not today. Today she had a pie cooling on the windowsill and a dinner to start, and a son who had called her mother, who would need to be quietly fed an extra biscuit at supper without anyone making a scene about it. She pulled the door of Mira's room nearly shut behind her. Not all the way, just nearly. She left a finger's width of space so that the air of the rest of the house could find its way in. She walked back down the hall toward the kitchen where the work waited. The first snow came on the 3rd of December, soft at first the way it always begins, drifting down through the gray afternoon light, in the kind of flakes a child catches on his tongue. By nightfall, the wind had risen, and by midnight, the world outside the kitchen window was nothing but a roaring wall of white. Nora had grown up in St. Louis. She had known winter. She had not known this. This was Wyoming winter, and Wyoming winter was a different country. For 3 days, the snow fell. It piled against the north side of the house up to the eaves of the kitchen window. It buried the wood pile so that Wesley and Crawford had to dig down to it twice a day. The path between the house and the barn became a tunnel walls of snow taller than Cade on either side. The wind howled around the corners of the limestone walls in the long voice of something hungry. In the kitchen, life went on. Nora kept the stove fed. She made stews that simmered all day, beans and salt pork, and whatever dried vegetables remained in the cellar. She baked bread every morning so the house would smell of it when the boys came in, stamping snow off their boots. She mended winter clothes that had been mended too many times already. She read aloud from the family Bible after supper, the way she had heard Mira used to do, and the boys gathered close around the lamp and listened, even Wesley, who pretended he was only there for the warmth. Ezra moved into the house from the bunkhouse he had been sharing with one of the older hands. The bunkhouse was too cold, Garrett said. Ezra slept on a cot in the front room. He did not look at Nora across breakfast. He looked at his coffee or at the buzz or at the fire. He was careful. He was a man being careful in the way a man is careful when he knows his own heart and has decided not to follow it. Nora was careful too. She did not seek Ezra out. She did not avoid him. She passed him biscuits with the same hand she passed them to Crawford. She thanked him for chopping wood the same way she thanked Wesley. She gave him no reason to hope and no reason to grieve. The line was very fine. She walked it. Garrett saw. Garrett did not say. On the night of the 7th of December, Rue began to cough. It was a small cough at first, the kind of cough any child gets in winter. He coughed twice during supper and reached for his cup of milk. Nora poured him a second cup. She put her hand on his forehead. It was a little warm, not much. She thought he has been chilled. She thought, I will keep him close to the stove tomorrow. But in the night, the cough deepened. She heard it through the wall. She had moved her room to the one nearest the front of the house where she could hear the children. She lay in the dark and listened. The cough came again. A wet cough this time, the kind that catches in the chest and tears its way out. She got out of bed. She lit the lamp. She walked down the hall in her shawl and her bare feet on the cold boards. Rue was sitting up in his bed. He was sitting up because he could not breathe lying down. His small face was flushed bright red. His eyes were glassy. He looked at her and tried to speak, and the cough took him again. And when it passed, there was a thin, watery fluid at the corner of his mouth, faintly streaked. She knew that look. She had seen her mother cough that way for the last months of her life. She had heard indirectly that Mira had ended the same way. The boys had told her. Kate had told her. She did not cry out. She did not run. She stood very still for 1 second and pressed her hand over her mouth, and she said inside herself, "You do not get this one. You do not get this child." She wrapped Rue in his blanket. She carried him to the kitchen and laid him on the long bench by the stove where the warmth was steadiest. She built up the fire. She set water to boil. She went down the hall to Garrett's room and knocked once and opened the door. Garrett came up, out of sleep the way a man does who has been sleeping with one ear open for years. He was dressed and at her side in the kitchen within 3 minutes. He looked at Rue. He looked at the wet streak at the corner of the boy's mouth. The blood drained from his face. "Mira," he whispered. "Oh God, not him. Not him too." "Listen to me," Nora said. Her voice was low and steady. She had decided in the hall that she would be the steady one tonight because Garrett could not be. "We do not know yet that it is what took her. It might be lung fever. It might be the croup. It might be something he eats his way through in a week. We do not know. He is 4 years old, Nora. He is the same age. He is not the same boy. He is Rue. He is strong. Look at him." Rue looked at them with his bright, fevered eyes and tried to smile. The cough caught him again and bent him double on the bench. Nora was already moving. She put a kettle on for steam. She mixed mustard with hot water in a cloth poultice for his chest, the way her mother had taught her. She set water to steep with sage leaves from the bunch that hung dry by the window. Garrett stood watching her work. He stood watching the way a drowning man watches a rope. "The doctor," he said. "We need the doctor." "The doctor is in Sorrow Creek, 8 miles, in this snow." "I will go." "You will not." "Nora." "Garrett." She turned and looked at him. "If you go and you do not come back, this boy loses both parents in one night. I will not allow it. Do you hear me? I will not allow it." He stared at her. She had never spoken to him in that voice before. He had not known she had it. Behind them in the doorway of the kitchen, Ezra spoke. "I will go." They both turned. He was already dressed. He was pulling on his heavy coat. He had heard everything from the front room. He was wrapping a scarf around his throat and pulling his hat low on his brow. "Ezra," Garrett said, "you stay with your wife and your son brother. I will bring the doctor. I know the country. I know the trail. I have ridden it in worse than this. There is no worse than this. Then I will ride it in this." He looked at Garrett. He looked at Nora. There was no goodness in his amber eyes, only purpose. "If I do not come back, you will have lost a brother. You will not have lost your boy. Take the better trade, Garrett. Stay here." He went out the door. The cold came in like a knife. Then the door closed behind him, and the cold was sealed back outside, and they were alone with the boy on the bench. Garrett dropped to his knees beside the bench. He took Rue's small, hot hand between his two large, rough ones. He bowed his head. He did not pray aloud. He did not pray in words. He prayed the way a father prays when he has used up all his words long ago. Nora worked. She worked through the rest of the night and into the gray, slow dawn. She held the steaming kettle near the boy's face with a towel tented over his head so that the wet heat could ease his chest. She rubbed the mustard poultice on him and changed it every hour. She held him upright when the cough took him so that he would not choke on his own breath. She poured sage tea into him, a teaspoon at a time. She sang under her breath old hymns she had learned from her mother, soft and low, while Garrett held the boy's other hand and would not let go. The other boys came down one by one. Cade first, who took one look and went silently to the woodpile and brought back an armload of split logs without being asked. Crawford came down and stoked the fire. Porter brought a cool cloth for Rue's forehead. Reeves sat in the corner and watched and held a small drawing he had made of the family, all of them together, and he held it the way some children hold a charm. Wesley came last. Wesley stood in the doorway and looked at his small brother on the bench and looked at his father on his knees and looked at Nora bent over with the kettle, and his face did something that was not a face Nora had seen on him before. He came across the kitchen and he sat down beside his father on the floor, and he put his arm around his father's shoulders, and the two of them knelt there together while Nora worked. The blizzard outside did not abate. The wind rose and fell and rose again. The kitchen window glazed over with frost, so thick the shapes of the world beyond were lost. Sometime in the late morning, Cade said very quietly that the doctor would not come. Not in this, not even if Uncle Ezra had reached him. Nora did not look up. "He will come," she said, "or he will not. We will work either way." The day passed. Rue slept in fits. The cough came less often now, but each time it came it was deeper, and the wet streak at his lip was worse, and his lips had taken on a faint blue color at the edges that frightened Nora more than anything else. She stripped him to his nightshirt and rubbed his chest with goose grease that had been rendered down with onion. She propped him higher on a pile of folded quilts. She kept the kettle steaming. She did not stop. She did not sit. Garrett brought her bread and cheese, and she ate standing with one hand, while the other held a cool cloth to Rue's forehead. Night came again. The wind was still howling. There was no doctor. There was no Ezra. Nora sat on the bench beside Rue with the boy's small body in her lap. She had taken off her shoes. Her feet ached. Her back ached. Her arms ached from holding him upright through hours of coughing. She held him now against her shoulder, his cheek pressed to the curve of her neck. She could feel his breath on her skin, shallow and ragged. She could feel his heart against her own collarbone, fast and small and tired. Garrett was sitting on the floor with his back against the bench, his head leaning lightly against her hip. He had not slept. He had not eaten. He held Rue's foot in his hand as if to be sure it was still warm. "I cannot lose him," Garrett said. He said it very softly, not to her, almost to himself. "Nora, I cannot lose him. I know. I told myself when Mira went that I had given everything I could give. I had nothing left. I had only the boys to keep going for. If I lose Rue, you will not lose him. You do not know that." "No, I do not. But I am telling you anyway, hold to it." He turned his head and looked up at her, and she looked down at him, and the boy slept fitfully against her neck. And in that long-held look, she understood that whatever this man had become in the past weeks, whatever she had become to him, was now standing on a knife's edge over the body of a 4-year-old child. If Rue lived, they would walk into the rest of their lives together. If Rue did not, something in Garrett would close again and would not reopen. She knew it. He knew she knew it. She kept her hand on Rue's back. She felt his breath. She prayed. At 3 in the morning, the fever broke. She felt it before she saw it. She felt the heat go out of his small back like a draft going out of a chimney. She felt him sigh against her shoulder, a long, real sigh, and then his breathing eased. The wet cough did not come. He shifted in her arms. He turned his small face up. He opened his eyes. He looked at her. He looked at her in the lamplight of a Wyoming winter night, with his small chest finally rising and falling without struggle, and he said one word: "Mama." It was the first time he had said it. Nora bent her head to his and she wept silently into his hair. She did not make a sound. She was too tired to make a sound. Garrett rose from the floor in one slow motion, and he came and he sat beside her on the bench, and he put his arm around her and the boy together, and he wept too in the inward stone way she had come to recognize, his shoulders barely moving, only his eyes changing. The kitchen was quiet except for the popping of the stove and the slowly easing breath of the child. After a long time, Garrett turned his face to her and he kissed her. It was a small kiss. It was not the kiss of a man claiming his wife. It was the kiss of a man saying thank you with his whole soul. He kissed her once on the corner of her mouth, and then he pressed his forehead to hers, and they sat that way with Rue between them, breathing. Outside, the wind began to ease. Ezra came at dawn. He came with the doctor riding behind him on a borrowed mule. He came white with snow from the brim of his hat to the heels of his boots. He came holding the reins of his horse with his right hand only because his left hand was wrapped in a bloody rag, and inside the rag, 2 of the fingers had gone black with frostbite and would have to be taken off that very day to keep the rot from his hand. He came staggering. He came so cold he could not speak. He had ridden through the worst night Wyoming had given in 12 years, and he had reached the doctor, and he had brought the doctor home, and now he was nearly finished. Garrett met him at the door. Garrett took him under one arm, and the doctor took him under the other, and they walked him into the kitchen and set him by the stove. The doctor pulled off his coat and set immediately to work on the fingers with his small bag of instruments and a bottle of whiskey for the pain. Ezra did not cry out. He bit down on a leather strap. His face went whiter than it already was. The doctor took the two ruined fingers off at the second knuckle cleanly and bound the hand in fresh white linen. When it was done, Ezra leaned back against the wall and closed his eyes. Nora brought him a cup of broth. He drank it slowly. He looked at her over the rim of the cup. He looked at Rue, who was sitting up now on the bench, watching everything with wide eyes color back in his cheeks. Ezra smiled. It was a small, white smile with no strength in it. "I made it," he said. "You made it," Nora said. "You saved his life. You saved his life. I just brought the man with the bag." She set her hand on his good shoulder. She held it there. "Ezra, do not say it, Nora. Not now. I am too tired." She nodded. She removed her hand. She went to fetch a pillow for him and a blanket, and she made him a place to lie down by the stove, and within minutes he was asleep with his bandaged hand cradled against his chest like a child holding a doll. The doctor stayed 3 days. He examined Rue every few hours. He pronounced him not lung fever after all. A heavy bronchial sickness, he said, gone deep into the smaller airways, dangerous in a child, but not the wasting disease that had taken his mother. The thin streak, Nora had thought, was blood at the corner of his mouth in the lamplight, had been only the irritation of broken capillaries from the violence of the coughing, not the slow, steady bleed that had filled Mira's lungs at the end. The boy would recover fully, the doctor said, with rest and warmth and good food. Nora wept quietly into her apron when she heard it. Garrett pressed his hand against the doctor's shoulder and could not speak. When the storm finally broke, the doctor rode home with his fee paid in 2 bushels of dried corn and a side of bacon, the only currency the Holloway place had to spare in deep winter. Ezra stayed by the stove until his color came back. He did not look at Nora across the room more than was necessary. He did not seek her out. He healed in silence. One afternoon in early February, when the snow had settled hard and bright across the country, and the worst of the cold was past, Ezra came to her in the kitchen while she was kneading bread. "Nora, yes, I am leaving." She set the dough down. She wiped her hands. "Where will you go?" "Colorado. There is land down south of Trinidad I have had my eye on for 2 years. A small place. Good water. I have saved enough to make a start." "When?" "As soon as the pass is open. April, maybe. May at the latest." She looked at him. He was leaning in the doorway. He was not meeting her eyes. "Ezra, do not, Nora. Ezra, look at me." He looked at her. "You do not have to go. This is your home. The boys love you. Garrett loves you. We have room for you here for the rest of your life if you want it." "I know." "Then why?" He was quiet for a long moment. "Because Mira left a letter," he said finally. "I read it. The night Garrett brought it down to the kitchen, and we all sat around and talked about her. He left it on the table when he went to bed. I read it. I should not have. I read the part about me." Nora went very still. "She knew," he said. He gave a small, thin smile. "I did not know she knew. I did not know I knew. Not until she put it in writing in a letter she sent forward through the dark to a woman she had not yet met. That is when I understood my own heart. She understood it before I did. So now I understand it. And now I am leaving. Because that is the only thing a decent man can do, Nora. You belong to my brother, not on paper, not because the law says so, because that is what the both of you have been growing toward since the night you fed his children. I have seen it. I am glad of it. I will not stand in the way of it. So I will go and I will find my own land and my own life, and I will pray that someday I find a woman of my own who looks at me the way my brother looks at you when he thinks no one is watching. Nora's eyes filled. She did not try to hide it. Ezra, be good to him, Nora. He is a stubborn man and a proud one, and he does not know how to ask for what he needs. You will have to give it to him before he asks. He will let you. He is letting you already. I will. And give the boys my love, all of them. Tell Cade I will write him. Tell Wesley to come down and see the country when his father can spare him. Tell Rue. He could not finish. I will tell Rue, she said softly, that his uncle Ezra rode through a blizzard to save his life, and that he is the bravest man any of us will ever know. Ezra nodded. He pushed himself off the doorframe. He was still a little stiff in his left side from the night he had ridden through hell and back. He walked out of the kitchen. He did not look back. In April, when the passes opened, he packed a single horse and saddlebags and rode south. The boys gathered in the yard to see him off. Cade ran beside the horse for half a mile down the Breckett Road before Ezra leaned down and lifted him by the back of his coat and hugged him tight and set him back on the road. Cade walked back to the house alone. He did not speak to anyone for the rest of that day. But he was not the same boy who had hated her arrival in September. He was a boy who had learned to hold things and let them go, and who had a place at the kitchen table that was his now and would always be. The morning after Ezra rode south, Garrett came to her in the kitchen with something small, held in his closed hand. He stood for a moment awkward as a young suitor. He had not touched her except in passing since the night Rue's fever broke. Nora had let the distance be what it was. She had thought perhaps that small kiss had been all of it. Perhaps that had been the whole of what he could give. She had not pressed. She had not asked for more. But he opened his hand now. A thin, plain gold band worn smooth lay in his palm. It was my mother's, he said. She wore it 41 years. My father gave it to me before he died and told me to give it to the woman who made my life worth living. I gave it to Mira when I married her. She gave it back to me on her last morning. She told me to keep it for whoever came after. I think she knew even then who that would be. Nora's eyes filled. She held out her left hand. He slipped the ring on. It fit as if it had been waiting for the finger that wore it now. You do not have to say anything, he said. I just wanted it to be on your hand before any more time passed. She did not say anything. She did not need to. She took his rough hand in both of hers and held it against her cheek for a long, quiet moment. And then she went back to her bread and he went back out to the spring work, and the ring sat on her finger and caught the kitchen light all the rest of that day. In June, a marshal came up the Breckett Road from Cheyenne. He sat at the kitchen table and he drank a cup of Nora's coffee, and he told her very politely that a man named Jasper Calloway had been arrested in a town called Laramie 3 weeks before. He had been running a confidence scheme on widows. 3 different women in 3 different territories had laid charges, and the charges had stuck, and Jasper Calloway would be spending the next 10 years in the territorial prison at Laramie. The marshal had been told that Mr. Calloway had once made trouble for Mrs. Holloway, and the office had thought she would want to know. Nora set down her cup. She looked at the marshal. She looked at her own hands, her plump, capable hands, with flowers still under one nail, and the thin gold band shining on her ring finger. "Thank you," she said. Her voice was steady. "Thank you for riding all the way up here to tell me." "Ma'am." He touched the brim of his hat. "We thought you ought to hear it from someone official, so you would know it was over. It is over." "Yes, ma'am." He drank the rest of his coffee. He left. Nora sat at the table for a long time after he had gone. The kitchen was quiet. Outside, Porter was singing tunelessly while he weeded the kitchen garden. Rue was in the front room playing with the wooden horse Ezra had carved for him before he left. Garrett was somewhere out in the high pasture. The whole house breathed around her slow and easy, and she sat at her own kitchen table, and she let herself understand slowly that the last shadow of her old life had been cleared away. She got up. She went to the lamp shelf. She took down the iron key, the rust-pitted heavy thing that had been pressed into her hand by Silas Brand on a September afternoon 9 months earlier. She had kept it in a drawer. She had not known what to do with it. She walked to the stove. She opened the firebox. The flames were burning low and steady, ready for the supper fire. She set the key in among the coals. She watched it. The fire took it. The iron began to glow at the edges. Within a few minutes, it was orange. Within an hour, it would be slag. Within a day, it would be nothing. She closed the stove. She did not say anything. She did not need to. In July, going through the journal of Mira Holloway because Mira had written that she should, Nora found something she had not expected. She found tucked between 2 pages near the back a second sealed letter. The handwriting on the front read very simply, "For Nora, to be read when you have lived here a year." A year. She had lived there 10 months going on 11. Close enough, she broke the seal. The letter was short. "Dear Nora," it began, "if you are reading this, you have stayed. Thank you. I did not know if you would. I dared to hope. There are some things I want you to know that I could not put in the first letter. The first letter was for the woman who arrived. This one is for the woman who has lived here a year and has learned the shape of this family. About the boys, Wesley will be a man before you are ready. Let him go when he asks to go. He needs to find his own ground, and he will come back to you stronger for it. Crawford will be the one who stays close. He will marry a girl from the valley before he is 20. Watch out for the hartshorn girl. She is sweet, but she is not for him. There is a girl named Iris who comes to church sometimes. Watch for her. Cade will surprise you. He has the deepest heart of the 6 and the most fragile one, and he will pay you back for every kindness 10 times over. Porter will be your cook. Reeve will be your dreamer. Rue will be your shadow until he is 10, and your apprentice until he is 18, and then he will be his own man and a good one. About Garrett, I loved him. I love him still. I want him to be happy. I want him to laugh again. I want him to put his hand on the small of a woman's back at a dance and remember that he is alive. If you can give him those things, you have given me more than I could give him at the end. I was sick for a long time before I died. I could not be a wife to him for almost a year. I gave him children, but I could not give him a partner. You can. I bless it. With every part of me, I bless it. About yourself, you are not a substitute. You are not a replacement. You are not a second wife. You are the wife of the man Garrett has become. The wife of the woman you have become. 2 new people in a new house on the bones of an old one. That is all marriage ever is, even the first time. Do not let anyone in Sorrow Creek tell you different, especially not Beulah Patterson. She is a good woman, but she is jealous of any woman she did not raise. There is something else I should tell you. I prayed every night for the last 6 months of my life for the woman who would come after me. I prayed that she would be strong, that she would be patient, that she would have a body soft enough to hold 6 boys when they cried, and a back strong enough to do the work, and a heart open enough to love a man who had stopped knowing how to ask for love. I prayed for you, Nora. I knew your name in my prayers before you had it in mine. The Lord answered. He always does eventually in his own time. Take care of them. Take care of yourself. Be happy. Be loved. Your sister who never met you, Era. Nora read it twice. She folded it. She put it in the drawer of the dresser in her room beside the first letter. She did not show it to Garrett that day. She would in time. But that letter, like the first one, was hers first. It was woman to woman. It had crossed the boundary. In August, Wesley came to her in the kitchen. He was 18 now. He had grown another inch over the summer. He had begun to wear his father's shape, broad and steady. I want to ride down to Colorado, he said. I want to see Uncle Ezra. I want to learn his country. I want to know if there is room there for me. Nora set down the bowl she was drying. Have you spoken to your father? Yes. What did he say? He said it was a good thing for a young man to do. He said I should ask you too. She smiled. Did he? He said you have as much say over it as he does. She crossed to him. She put her hand on his cheek. He was taller than her by a full head now, and his face had begun to lose the boy's softness, and she could see in him already the man he was going to be. A good man, a man who stacked his own plate. Go, she said. Go and see your uncle. Go and learn the country. Come back to us before the snow. I will, I promise. He bent down. He kissed her on the cheek. It was the first time he had done that. She held his shoulders for a moment after, and she let him go. He left in the second week of August. He rode south on his good roan horse with a bedroll behind the saddle and 3 letters in his pocket from Kate and Porter and Rue, all of them addressed to Uncle Ezra and full of news. Nora stood on the porch and watched him go. Garrett stood beside her. He took her hand. They watched together until Wesley was a small, dark shape on the southern road, and then a smaller one, and then nothing. He will be all right, Garrett said. Yes. He is not Wesley anymore. He is going to come back named something else, a man's name. He will always be Wesley to me. Garrett squeezed her hand. They went back inside. In September, almost exactly a year after her arrival in Sorrow Creek, Nora sat on the edge of her bed one morning, and she counted backward, and she counted forward, and she covered her mouth with her hand. She went out to the porch. Garrett was sitting on the step, drinking his coffee, watching the morning come up over the high pasture. She sat down beside him. She did not speak for a while. Garrett, I am with child. He turned and looked at her. He did not move otherwise. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he set his coffee cup down very carefully on the porch board. He turned his whole body toward her. He took her hand. He pressed it to his mouth. He held it there. He closed his eyes. When he could speak, he said, Nora. Yes, a child. Yes, of ours. Of ours. He bowed his head. The morning sun was on the back of his neck. His hand around hers was friof and warm. He did not weep, or if he did, the weeping went so far inside him that no one would ever see its surface. His shoulders did not move. Only his eyes changed. After a while, he raised his head. They were bright. This time he said, I will be there, not at the calving shed when she comes, not at the south fence, here, in this house. I miss too much of the others. I will not miss this one. All right, all right. He pulled her against him. She leaned her head on his shoulder. Below them in the yard, Rue came around the corner of the house chasing a barn cat, his small voice high and bright in the morning, and Cade came out behind him to slow him down before he scared the cat into the rafters, and Porter shouted from the kitchen that the biscuits were burning, and Reeve laughed somewhere out of sight, and Crawford whistled, coming up from the barn. The whole house was full of life. The whole place was full of it. In November, the Thanksgiving table was the longest it had ever been at the Holloway Ranch. Wesley came home. He came home with Ezra, and Ezra came home with a young woman riding at his side. She was a tall, slender girl with reddish-brown hair pulled back in a simple knot, with calm green eyes and a strong handshake. Her name was Lorelei. She was a school teacher's daughter from a little town outside Trinidad. She and Ezra had been engaged 3 weeks. They had ridden up together so the family could meet her. They would be married in the spring on his land. Lorelei walked into the kitchen and looked at Nora and Nora smiled back, and the two women understood each other without a word being said. Later, when the men had gone out to see the new colt, Lorelei stayed in the kitchen with Nora. The two women dried dishes side by side. Lorelei was quiet for a while, and then she said, Ezra wrote me about you, months ago before he ever came courting. He said there was a woman in his brother's house who had walked into a hard situation and made it bearable for everyone in it. He said if I ever met her, I would understand why he was the man he was when he came down to Trinidad. Nora smiled at the dish in her hands. He told me about you in his letters. He said you were patient with him. He said you did not push. I did not have to push. He was ready when he came. Yes, Nora said softly. Yes, I think he was. The two women understood each other completely in that small exchange and never spoke of it again. The table that night sat 10, Garrett at the head, Nora at his right, Ezra and Lorelei across from her, Wesley beside his uncle, then Crawford, then Kate, then Porter, then Reeve with Rue on a stool at the corner near his father where he could see everything. Garrett rose. He held his glass. I am not a man for speeches, he said. I was raised to keep my mouth shut at the table, and my brother was raised the same way, and we are both of us going to fail at it tonight. A small laugh moved around the table. This time last year, Garrett said, this house was a house I was holding together with my hands, and I was using up the last of my hands to do it. I did not know it. I thought I was managing. I was not managing. I was drowning slowly in a kitchen that did not smell of bread. My boys were eating cold meals or burning their own fingers on a stove that was too tall for them, and I was telling myself that this was just how things were. And then a stagecoach pulled up at Sorrow Creek, and a woman stepped down with an iron key in her hand. My first wife arranged for her in the last weeks of her life. I did not know it. I lived 2 years thinking the world had simply sent me a stranger by some mistake of paperwork. I only learned the truth on the night she arrived when an old iron key opened a door I had not been able to open myself. Mira always was the smartest person at any table she sat at. She is sitting at this one tonight in her way. Her hand is on this table. I want us all to remember that. He paused. He lifted his glass slightly higher. To Mira, who saved this family in death the way she saved it in life. To Ezra, who saved my son's life with his own hand and gave up 2 fingers for the privilege and who did not stop saving us when he rode out of here last spring. He is still saving us. I see it in his face. To Lorelei, who is welcome in this family, the way the spring is welcome after a hard winter. To my sons, all seven of them, one of them not yet here, one of them not yet named. To Nora, who answered the advertisement my dead wife placed without my knowing, who came up that road carrying a key she did not understand, who fed my boys on the first night and has not stopped feeding them since, who held my smallest child through a fever that should have killed him and would not let go, who made me into a man again when I had thought myself permanently turned to stone. To Nora, my wife, the wife of the man I have become. He looked down at her. To my wife. The boys raised their cups. Wesley raised his higher. Cade raised his without looking at anyone, his eyes very bright. Lorelei smiled and lifted her glass to Nora across the table. Ezra raised his cup in his right hand because the left one would not close all the way around it anymore, and his eyes met Nora's only once, and there was no pain in them that she could see. Only peace. Only the deep peace of a man who has done the thing he had to do and has been given grace for it. To Nora, they said all of them. Nora could not answer. She could only numb and put her hand over her belly where her seventh child was growing, and she could only let the tears go down her face without trying to wipe them. After supper, when the dishes were clean and the children had been sent to bed, and Lorelei had gone out to the porch with Ezra to look at the cold, bright Wyoming stars, Garrett and Nora sat alone together at the kitchen table. The lamp burned low between them. The fire popped in the stove. Outside, the night was deep and still. I burned the key, Nora said. He looked up. What key? The iron one. The one Silas Brand gave me. I burned it in the stove in June. It is gone. Why? Because it had finished its work. It opened the door I needed to walk through. I do not need to carry it anymore. He nodded slowly. And the letters I keep, they are not finished. I read them sometimes. I will give them to our daughter when she come. Daughter, oh. I think she is a daughter. I do not know why. I just think it. He smiled. We will name her something good. We will. They sat in the lamplight for a while longer. He took her hand across the table. She turned her palm up under his and let him hold it. The thin, plain gold band of his mother's ring sat on her finger and caught the light. Nora. Yes. I did not come here to save anyone either. When I started this place, I came to make a life. Mira came with me. We made one. Then I lost her, and I thought the life was over. I thought I was just keeping the boys alive until they could keep themselves alive, and then I was going to sit down and stop. I had decided that. I had not told anyone, but I had decided it. I know. You knew. Yes. Of course you did. You always know. He pressed her hand. But you did not come here to save anyone. You said so yourself. You said it the first night. I heard you say it to yourself in the kitchen when you thought I had gone to bed. I had not gone to bed. I was standing in the hall. I heard you say I am not here to rescue anyone. And then you said, but I am here. And I thought that is the bravest thing I have ever heard a person say. It is not brave, it is just true. Most true things are brave to say. She bowed her head. She rested her forehead on the back of his hand for a moment. He sat very still. When she raised her head again, she said, I am here, Garrett. I am still here. I am going to keep being here. I know, he said. I know you are. The lamp flickered. The fire settled. Outside, somewhere across the yard, Porter's lantern still burned at the barn door, the way it had burned every night since she had arrived, the way it would burn every night as long as the Holloway place stood. A small, warm point of light in the great dark country, a candle set in a window for someone who had not yet come home. Except now, finally, everyone had.